Welcome to the Destinations with Doni podcast, where we explore your cultural passions. Destination home, cuisine, community, relationships, and passion. Embrace your cultural identity as we bring you the tools to live in full color. Welcome to the Destinations with Doni podcast, where we explore your cultural passions so you can live in full color. Today, I'm so excited to have a wonderful guest. Kahlea, I would like you to say your name so that it's said properly. I'm pretty sure I know how to say it, but I'd like to hear it from you, and I'd like our guest to hear it from you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Kahlea Hunt-Khabir. So
Wonderful. And so I would have gotten it right. I do that to all of our guests. I think I surprise everybody when I do that. But let me introduce you so everyone knows with whom we are speaking today. So Kahlea has a master's degree and is working on her PhD. She's a PhD candidate studying higher education, student affairs, and international education policy at the University of Maryland. She's working as a grad research assistant for the Department of Counseling, Higher Education, and Special Education. In addition to this, she's a racial equity consultant now, how do you say the name for your company? Is it ForeverWriot?
it's ForeverWriot, so kind of like a play on riot, but with writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone, it's spelled WRIOT, ForeverWriot. Oh, I love it. I love it. Because you, of course, I know, are a prolific writer. So this company was co-founded by Kahlea in 2019. She graduated from the University of Denver in 2020 with a master's degree in higher education, emphasizing diversity and learning. In her time at DU, she was the program coordinator for the Denver Promise Scholars Program, principal investigator for Seeking Grace, mining the archives of Black women at the University of Denver. It was a project and a documentary that we will discuss, and she worked for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. The overarching scope of her research is racial equity, explicitly examining the socialization process of Black women in higher education from a comparative African diaspora lens. So Kahlea has worked on research projects in Brazil. I remember the first time you went to Brazil. We will talk about that.
Yes,
Uh,
ma'am.
South Africa, Jamaica, and the Netherlands. She believes that the answers to solving global racial inequities are our similarities and our differences. So she co-authored the paper Disrupting Whiteness, an introductory statistic course design, implications for educational leadership, released in winter 2020. So Kahlea, wow, that's quite a lot. That's quite the resume.
It's
Wow.
crazy to hear. Like, oh wow, these are the things.
It makes me realize how long that we've been in contact, how long I've known you. It's been a while.
You were my first undergraduate, like post high school boss. Like you hired me in 2013 when I got to CSU.
Yeah.
Um, and I am so happy to reconnect because it feels like so full circle because even like ForeverWriot and like copywriting, no one would know this, but Doni is who got me into that. Blogging and writing and copywriting and copy editing was all through Collab Marketing Center. So even the international interest in seeing what you were doing back then, and that was like, I want to do this. Like, I want to go and write about places. So I so appreciate it. That's why when I dropped the documentary, I was like, I have to send this to Doni because this is such a manifestation of so many things that I did with her.
It really, really was. And I saw that immediately. And it is so beautifully done. Kudos to you. I was very, very impressed. And so many things that I didn't know. It was very educational and eye opening. So, what was the process that brought you to make? Well, first of all, tell us about the documentary.
Okay, so a documentary. This it's called Seeking Grace, mining the archives of Black women at the University of Denver. It actually was a project that started before I got to the University of Denver by Dr. Nicole Joseph. She was really interested in some of the work Everyone knew about the first Black woman who graduated from the University of Denver, but Grace, she was the second Black woman, was not found anywhere in the archives.
Mm.
So it was like this, I don't know, symbolism, I suppose, that like universities like to do, where it's like, this is the first person, but we really don't know the in between of how we got there. So she started to do that work.
Ask you a quick question. I
Yeah.
don't know if this question is going to be controversial, but when you look at the picture of the two of them, I see your face.
Let's get into it. Let's get into it because we are also talking about a time where the one drop rule was really big. And
Explain that to the listeners, the one drop rule.
so this was an era of time that is really a manifestation of the slavery, transatlantic slave trade, where if you were to have any black in you, you were to consider to be black. And so with that, we start to really contend with colorism in a different kind of way, and phenotypically passing who's considered to be black, who is not considered to be black. And personally, that's where the archives, I struggled with the archives a lot because of that, because
Mm.
we are using folks' personal discernment to decide who is black and who is not. And oftentimes, these universities and this era in general was propping up white passing black folks.
So,
Um,
so to the audience, for because we have listeners internationally, one drop, as Kahlea mentioned, meaning one drop of blood. So if you have one drop of black blood, that made you black in the United States at that time. And I don't even know when that rule, law, whatever, was taken off the books.
yeah, I don't either, because we're talking about like 1800s and like post emancipation things that were continual. So I'm actually going to look into when that's now after this, I'm going to look into figure out where that stopped, because I find in a lot of my historical work,
Mm,
um, a lot of the black women who we talk about in higher education as being these really big pillars are actually women who are white passing, which I
mm,
find to be very important to interrogate. Side note, a lot of my work, my other side of work, is actually on colorism in higher education. So
ah,
I look at the ways in which is very controversial, but I know I can say this because I know you, Donnie. I look in the ways in which people pacify me, because I'm a light skinned black woman who is more subversive, and they want to care for me in ways they don't want to care for my dark skinned counterparts.
mm.
And what that means as far as making space for other black women and what responsibilities do lighter skinned women, I talk about women, but folks in general have to actually share their privilege. And I know a lot of people don't like that conversation, but that came up in the archives a lot.
Well, it's interesting too. Excuse me, talking about colorism in the United States in general. So, both you and I work internationally, and seeing how things are, and just also looking at it through a lens as an adult versus when I was a child, and the
Yes.
differences in how I observe things now. One of the things that's always been fascinating to me. So, in the United States, I'm seen as dark skinned, but
Mm-hmm.
in Trinidad and Tobago, I'm seen as brown skinned, right?
Yes.
And so it's interesting to I have a specific recollection actually at a beauty shop, which is a
Mm-hmm.
thing in the United States for African Americans,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. The hair too. Hair always is a
Yeah,
determining factor.
exactly. And I never, I think most hairdressers weren't a fan of me at the beauty shop because it was a place of exploration for me. I literally would just always sit and look. I would just listen to everybody and absorb all the things because this is not the culture from which I came. So it was always like a new playground for me. It was
Mm-hmm.
listening to the stories and hearing what people had to say. I would laugh or whatever, but I never really spoke up. I was always very quiet. So I don't think any of my hairdressers really appreciated that. And then as I got older, I would always bring my laptop and work, and they didn't really. No, nobody
So
said
they're like,
anything.
they want to converse, and you're like, "Hey, I got things to do."
Because I couldn't really be part of the conversations, even though I had lived in the United States for a long time. It wasn't my culture, so, which is confusing for people. In the TCK or the cross cultural world, I'm considered a hidden immigrant where, I look like you, I sound like you, but I
Mhm.
think very differently from how you think. And so it's confusing for people. It's like, why is she acting like that? Why is she snotty? Why does she want to talk to us? Right? And so anyway, it was interesting because I was in the barbershop, and this is where, or the beauty shop, and this is where what movie? Chris Rock's movie came out, Good Hair.
Here.
Okay.
Mhm.
And there was a whole conversation, and I'm sitting under the dryer listening intently to everyone. Literally, the whole beauty shop is in the conversation, except for me, just listening. And all of a sudden, a very dark skinned hairdresser turns to me just out of the blue and says, "Oh, wait, I got to tell you this part of the story first. I was in Trinidad the day before, Trinidad and
Oh
Tobago.
wow.
Okay.
Okay.
And I don't even remember what comment I made, but I said something to a family member who is also brown skinned, but has a brighter complexion than I do, probably in between yours and mine. Okay.
Mhm.
And kind of like a, a, a butterscotch. Okay. That's what
Mhm.
their complexion was. So anyway, I made some comments, and I think I said something about being dark, and they looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Well, what are you talking about? You're brown skinned," and just so incredulous, like, where did you get this notion, right? And not that it's a bad thing. In Trinidad, well, at the time, I've noticed over the years that things have changed. In Trinidad, it was just a description. People didn't think about that because the majority of people looked like you somehow, some way. You just had
Yeah.
different curls, different skin color, whatever the case may be. You're describing someone, you say they're brown skin, they're dark skin, whatever the case may be. It wasn't detrimental at that time. So I came back, and this is just I'd say maybe 8 years ago. Came back the next day, and I remember, you can see it made an impression on me. It really hit me because I realized I've been in the United States so long that I forgot, right? I forgot this is only a thing there for me, okay?
Yeah.
So left that very important impression. I come in, I'm in the hairdresser's salon the next day, and in the middle of this conversation and all the hubbub, somebody turns to me and says, "Well, you're dark skinned. What do you think?" And I was just stunned.
You were like, this is exactly what I think that that's why going to different places in the diaspora is very important, right? Um, because I've had very similar experiences. South Africa, specifically Cape Town, was polarizing for me.
Mm,
Because of their own connotation with like colored people, and what they think about colored people was not anything that I had ever experienced. So, and just for the context, is like colored people are very seen to they have a negative connotation to seem to be the lost people of South Africa. They are not Afrikaans, they are not
mm,
South African black folks. And in Cape Town, there's a lot of poverty, drugs, and gangs amongst the colored people. So to
mm,
be colored or to be read as colored there can, in certain places, can cause conflict, which I learned very quickly in the Cape Town airport.
mm.
People didn't want to serve us. Someone threw a bagel at me. Like, we're talking about those kinds of
A
things.
bagel at you.
Yeah, they all thought we were colored, but half of our group was Afro Latina, so they could not place them, and
Yeah.
so it was like refusing service. Yeah, so that
Well,
was my intro to Cape Town.
wow.
So yeah, these things are very like this is one of my conversations that I feel very passionately about, because I think the way that anti-blackness manifests is very different in different locations, and also the same, unfortunately.
Yes, very different, but the same. And I mean, you're from Denver, but you went to school in Colorado, and now you're on the East Coast of the United States. So you can see that difference with those two places, can't you?
Yes, I can. I can. I would say I live in Prince George's County, which is one of the blackest and richest black counties in the United States. So I see a lot of, I would say, more so Black elitism,
Mm,
that manifest in very similar ways, like how we think of like the talented 10th, but the ways that Du Bois talks about was in these places. So like
mm,
a leader, elite blacks who would help the whole race. That's like the talented 10th notion. So it
mhm,
seems it's a little bit different than what we would definitely see in Colorado. But I would say that there are a lot of striking similarities as well. I love it. I feel like I live in a Black utopia, to be quite honest.
yeah.
But you know, everything has their gripe.
Everything has the pros and cons, right?
Yeah.
There's a pendulum for everything.
Yes, 100%. And that's why I'm like, I do love it here. Um, but I'm like, what is my next place? So where do I want to be? I'm considering Toronto. I like Toronto, so we'll see where life.
As we spoke off camera, same with me. I'm considering what's the next place. I
Yeah.
think that is the dilemma for people like us. We didn't talk about your cultural background, but when you have a multicultural lens and you have that internationally as well, I had a friend, because I travel so much. A friend of a friend from undergrad said, "Oh, I guess Donnie hasn't found herself yet because I still travel, right?" Because for them, I'm assuming, I don't know, I didn't speak with them, success means I don't know, you have a family and you stay in the one place. Where for me, I'm already multicultural. Success doesn't, if I stay in the one place, I'm not successful, right?
And you know, it's so fascinating because I feel like COVID took some of that from me.
Mm,
And I was in the Netherlands a couple of weeks before COVID. And you know, when I was there, it was talks kind of similar to the United States. We're seeing all the stuff, but we're not really knowing. But I feel like being stationary for so long created some kind of fear with international travel for me. Like I had
mm,
gone to
mm,
South Africa in 2019 for a month, but more so like I haven't done it in so long. Like,
mm.
what does this even look like to get back in this place where we've been so stationary? But
Yes.
I'm headed to Cuba next month, so I'm very excited. I say that to say that I'm getting back into
I
it.
say I'm a little jealous. I'm a lot jealous. I want to come.
Yes, this will be my first time. I'm going through a program with my school, so I'm really
Fantastic.
excited to kind of. I haven't been international since 2020, I guess. So
Oh, really?
yes, it's really, and it was transitions. I started a PhD program in 2021. We moved here in 2021. So I just now feel like I got a grip on my PhD life.
Yes. Well, that's a whole life. PhD life is no joke, right?
That's
Right?
the life out
So,
of you, truly.
so speaking of which, oh my goodness, your journey to get here and your research has to do with Black women in higher education. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I know you've experienced things from all sides, as I have as well, in higher education. Right? We always, I think, the portrayal is that other people um, may oppress people
Hmm.
of color, but often it comes from our own people.
Yeah, you know, my higher ed journey has been nothing short of tumultuous. And I will say that in retrospect, CSU was the nicer of the places.
Mm,
Which is very fascinating because you don't know what you don't know until you get
yes,
to a place that's worse, right?
yes,
And
yes.
so I felt like I really, working with you, being in the ethnic studies department and being in sociology was what was my saving grace as far as CSU. But I always dealt with very interesting encounters from Black people, non-Black people that were discounting my abilities to continue in higher education, right?
Yeah,
And so I've had a lot of, and I still have this sentiment of people not understanding why people like my work, people not understanding that I am a good writer, discounting my writing abilities, a lot of discrediting. And I've realized, because much like you, because you are also very brilliant and around and doing all this work, when people are humble and they are not boastful, especially Black women, about their work, and they're not fighting to find space in these systems that are harmful to us, people want to take that from you. Right.
Mm,
So I've dealt a lot, and the university was the epitome of this. Like, I had a lot of Black women telling me to be quiet and stand in the back because you don't do that here. Even with this project, people were very upset that me and my colleagues who worked on this, originally it was myself, Patrice Green, and Elizabeth Ndika, that we were calling out the fact that the university let a white woman lead this project. Um, they were upset. Black women were upset. They were saying, you should not even be saying that. You should be grateful that she's doing this, when we were begging for a Black woman to lead this project. Like, I've dealt with those things. And now that I'm at the PhD level, I've had to reconcile that a lot of folks who are in higher education, be it Black, white, BIPOC, all of the people, are conduits of the system,
mm,
right? So if you are genuinely buying into the white supremacist system that is higher education,
mm,
there's sometimes there's only so much that you're willing to support a student that is trying to be subversive. There's only so much that you're going to give. There's only so much that you're willing. And sometimes folks are coming from a survival standpoint, and sometimes folks are not, right? And
mm.
it's been up for me to discern. But I am grateful because I've had folks that have rode for me for real. Like, University of Denver, shout out to Dr. Tuitt. Like, he rode for me. Like, he was making sure that I was shielded from the nonsense that was the University of Denver. And without those folks, I could not do the work. Or like without the other Black women who were like standing on the front lines, like, no, we're gonna do this project. Um, I wouldn't be able to do it. And unfortunately, the University of Denver did not want to post the documentary because of how it made them look.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so that
I well,
it's
I don't
been,
know if you do. I'm also a DU grad. My
yes,
master's is DU.
yes,
Yes, yes. Oh
yes,
yeah, we
yes, yes.
talked
I
about it.
remember that because, yeah, they put it on ice. They actually deleted some of our work that we had.
Oh,
Um, so this documentary was supposed to be released in 2021.
okay.
They had a premiere, and
Wow.
yeah, nothing happened with it. And
Wow.
I actually I released it on my own, because it felt so defeating, and I gave it time, right? I'm like, maybe they'll do right by this project, maybe they'll do right by us. And they didn't, but I felt like this work was important, and I felt like it wasn't enough for the University of Denver to posture this as something that they supported without allowing for other folks to engage with this information that could be inspirational, that could be the thing that keeps you at the University of Denver or inspires you to do this kind of work. So yeah, I told myself that I was going to release all my projects that were on ice.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I started my year.
Well, it's interesting. So back to what you spoke about with people who may be in survival mode and whether they do things on purpose or not. The thing about back in 2020, Cultures did an issue called Time for Change.
Mm.
And a huge section of it, I can't remember how many pages, 20 or 30 pages, was discovering Blackness around the globe. So it was
I do
really,
remember. I remember seeing that.
oh, it was one of my favorite issues because it really speaks to all the different ways you can be. There's not
Mm.
one way to be, right?
Mhm.
And kind of like with your work, looking at the diaspora and the points of view from people all over the globe, right? And one thing in there that always has stood out for me is the introduction to the section. I can't think it was called Discovering Blackness or something like that, or Blackness Around the Globe. A woman from Nigeria who was very successful in the United States, was an immigrant and a United States citizen now. Ironically, just a side note, her daughter, both of the parents were Nigerian. The daughter or expatriated or repatriated, I don't know what you want to call, I guess expatriated for her, back to Nigeria. So an immigrant to Nigeria from the United States, because the daughter was born and raised here, or in the US, I shouldn't say here. And um but the mom, in the intro, there was a quote, and she said, any Black person coming to the United States really needs to learn Black history before making any kind of judgments,
Mm-hmm.
to really understand the place that you've come to. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a powerful statement, because I also think, first of all, you've probably discovered this in your research, Black people around the globe, and the way, well, just people in general, and the way the United States is viewed in general. Of course, when you're in the United States, you think you're viewed one way, and when you're out of the United States, depending on the country, it's a very different view, right?
Exactly that. Exactly. And you never know which one you're truly going to get.
Yes. And it's the same for Black people around the world. So very often, other Black cultures that come to the United States have a certain view of
Mm.
what they're going to find here, and the people here, and the Blackness that's here, right? And that's what that quote really embodied. It was like, really understand where you're coming and what this group of people has been through before you judge. And so I say that to say, to the point about higher education and then people and how they act, when you're swimming in that sea of oppression every day, no matter how
Mm-hmm.
much you fight it, and if you haven't been to a different sea, if you did, if you're in a hot springs, you didn't get out and jump into the river that's right next to the hot spring, you don't know that there's a difference in temperature, right? And
Exactly.
so often you soak in what you've been soaking in all this time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of time people just uh, impress that upon others. And unfortunately, then, especially people like you and I, who we're very different, right? So we're both Americans, and we're both cross cultural and multicultural and
Mm-hmm.
internationally mobile. All of those things lead to a way of thinking that is very sometimes threatening for people, sometimes upsetting for people, confusing for people, all of the things. And it comes at you every day.
And I've realized, and I really appreciate that because that really explains a lot. Because I've realized, even starting PhD, something that I have struggled with is the way that people treat you if they don't know how to place you, due to all the things that you said, right? So I have had I've had very interesting encounters about my name, and do I know the meaning of my name, and my
Mm,
family origins, and like things that are very pointed,
mm,
um that if I was not who I was, that could break someone, right? You're questioning about why my name is, you're not saying your name right, you're not doing these things, like, and this was just last semester, right? So these are very pertinent things that I'm encountering that can only come back to, I know who I am, and I
mm.
know I'm blessed to have learned so much about where my family comes from, who my family is, the lineage that I have. And I come from people who were like they were subversive, they were resistors, they were revolution, like these are
It's in
people
your
who, it
DNA.
is truly, when I first saw my acupuncturist, she was like, the militants you had, like, it's in your bloodstream, I just feel it in the room, like, who are your parents, like, who are your grandparents? And I'm like, my grandparents were Black Panthers, right? Like, they were this thing. So like, I really encourage people to like have that kind of grounding, because these institutions try to take everything from Black women in particular. And if we don't have that grounding, if we don't have that community, if we don't have that spirituality, and for me, like, travel, and this is what I'm studying with my international stuff, like, travel has been what has broken up and disrupted a lot of this monotony,
Yes.
oppression, whatever you want to call it, this violence of higher education. And I
Yes.
found that a lot of Black women are using this as a tool.
Yes.
And a lot of Black women are leaving the United States because of the severity of white supremacy culture in
Mm,
all the facets, right? Because it's not just higher education. We know that this is a phenomenon. And they're going to diasporic places. They're going to Ghana. They're going to Nigeria. They're going to different places where, at least their blackness is not as taboo.
Unusual or scary or
Yeah, like that's not even the thing that everyone is focused on.
yes, very much so. All right, so back to the documentary. I'm so glad that you did get it out. I find it to be very powerful.
Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes left. I mean, I like to keep my.
Forever.
What'd you say? What'd you say?
You forever.
I know that's what I like to keep the podcast short so it's quick and easy. At the same time, oh my gosh, all my guests, including you, are so great. It's like just when we get into the meat of the conversation, it's over, right? But what would you? I wanted to. Look, I'm trying to decide if we should go. Okay, well, let's end with the documentary. So I'm going to ask you this question first. Your experience in Brazil when you first went, because actually, right now is Carnival in Brazil.
Mm.
I was really thinking about going.
I need to go back. I have not been back since
Mm.
2016.
And where did you go?
So I started in Fortaleza, but I was in Manaus, Bahia. I pretty much traveled throughout Brazil,
Okay.
but I was in eastern then southern Brazil primarily.
And your thoughts on the experience?
I believe that Brazil, I would say I took a course with Eric Ishawada. I don't even know if he's still at CSU, but to this day, that course has expired, all of my work, but it was a comparative race course with South Africa, Brazil, and the United States.
Hmm.
I knew that those are the three places that I wanted to go to study race,
Hmm.
because they have very similar history shared. There's a shared histories, but there's very distinct differences, and I was like, I want to go. At the time when we started to read about Brazil, I was like, there's no way that this place is like what I'm reading about. There's no way that it's this hectic, that the racial dynamics are this da da da. And to be honest, when I went there, it was far beyond that.
Hmm.
And so Brazil is a very special place. And Brazil reminds me so much of the deep oppression of Black folks in the United States, um,
Hmm.
and the way that it has not been reconciled. There has not been reparations. There has been so much devastation and violence. And when you go to those places, for me, as someone who's more spiritually in tune, you can pick up on that. You see it, you feel it. And back to what you said about being a part of the African diaspora, I experience with a lot of Black women from Brazil were experiencing because I blended into the fabric. Right?
Hmm.
And so sometimes that can be good, but sometimes that can be detrimental. And so I always like to see both sides because I think met a lot of people who they continuously go to Brazil because they're like, you can't go one time, like you have to keep
Agree.
going.
Agree.
And so I haven't crossed the bridge of wanting to go back because
Yeah.
my experience was not pleasant. And like I would say, once I finish this program, that's a place that I would like to go back to.
It's interesting what you're saying is what my experience was in India, and most people don't realize that most of Trinidad is East Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the actual breakdown now, but it used to be like 54%, I think, East Indian and like 46% African and
Mm.
3% Chinese and 1% Arabic. And so, and for many other reasons too, I have a lot of connection to that culture. But your experience in Brazil was my experience in India. Then I was there for a month. And I part of it though, when I travel, I have no expectation. I don't
Mm.
go there to see sights. I don't go there to do specific touristy type things. I'm just going. So it's like, I'm taking a trip down the road, So I'm not thinking, oh, how wonderful or how great or whatever the case may be. I think for me, because I had so many ties to India, that was a different case. I had a lot of expectations. So
Mm.
the experience plus the expectations made it that much harsher, right?
Yeah.
As you know, the case system in India, the colorism. Well, but it just I'll have to do a show on that one time, an episode on
Please.
that. It's just there's so many things, but as you say though, it to me is reminiscent of Brazil in a way, and hearing you explain your experience and feeling what I feel about my experience, very similar. But
Mm.
what's interesting though is in Brazil, I didn't have that.
And it's so fascinating because I have a lot of people, like I know a lot of people who have gone to Brazil. I've met one woman, and her name is Dr. Rachel Harding. You might really be interested in her work is incredible, but she's at CU Denver. She was like very pivotal to me understanding, and she goes back, and she had had a similar experience but kept going back, and her experience transformed over the years.
Yes.
And so I think it's just really fascinating because I was like, so I just had the wild experience. I'm like, I just had the very wild experience. Like, I'm getting called Negra Linda every day by my host mom. So
Mm,
pretty. It's almost like you're not black. I'm dealing with it from black people, white people. I'm like, oh my gosh. And like that experience is what drove all the work that I do now. Right. So
mm.
it was a
This is
very,
why these things I think happen to us in our lives, right? Some
yes,
people can wallow in it, but really you need to take it and transform it so it not only changes you, but changes the world around you or the world in its entirety, right?
exactly that. And that's what I think that even like, so CSU is reflective of like the work that I did in Brazil for me. Like I was able to birth that work at CSU. The University of Denver, such a terrible experience, but I knew that I had to attach myself to this project to survive. When I went to South Africa, I worked on a documentary with a friend, and that's what inspired me to take Seeking Grace from just a paper and turn it into a documentary. Right. So all of these experiences have something real that came alive. And for that, I hate being like you're growing roses in concrete, but you truly are. And you have something to give back to the community, and that's what I'm hoping to do, more work like that, because I don't think higher education is ready for that. Like higher education is just now starting to see podcasting as a way to connect research to community.
Hmm.
Like that's very far behind. Like, and not to say that, but that's like they
Well,
still.
it's different. It's difficult to be a visionary or very forward thinking in a higher ed space because, I mean, these are centuries old, very elitist institutions.
Exactly.
Why they were founded, right? As much as even the land grant institutions want to think that they're for the people, it's still a very elitist way of thinking. And it takes a long time to move that massive mammoth institution and move the minds and the way of thinking that are centuries old as well.
And that is why I personally am advocating for more Black women to get out of higher education and to get
Mm,
into community, which is what my dissertation is about. There's a mass exodus of Black people, actually, of people of color, but specifically Black people and more specifically Black women leaving the academy.
mm.
Student affairs, faculty, graduate students are leaving, and they are going to do work in their communities. They're creating work, and I want to know, like, where are we going? What are we doing?
What are we doing? Who's having the barbecue?
What are we doing? Because I want to go there too, right? Like, I want to be in these spaces. And that's why I love and appreciate always seeing your work, because I'm like, yeah, where's Donnie? Like, she's here. Is she at Carnival? What is she doing? Because it can feel very isolating and siloed to always be contending with this. Which is why I'm like, I'm going to Cuba.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that because I think it's interesting to see the lens in which people see travel. And travel for me is not that. You literally have hit it on the head. When I say to people that it feeds my soul, I'm not joking.
Mhm.
It's a lifeline that you need in order to continue with the work because not everybody understands what you're bombarded with every
No.
single day.
And if we
So,
don't sustain ourselves, we have
yes,
to be strategic.
yes,
So I love
exactly.
it.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And I want you to say the name. We're going to put the link to your documentary in the description for this episode. We'll also promote the documentary. Say the name for us one more time.
Yes. The official documentary name is Seeking Grace: Black Women Finding Self at the University of Denver. So thank you so much for having me, allowing me to talk about some of my work, also for inspiring me to continue to do this work and be in these places and spaces. Your mentorship was so pivotal to my time, and I love that we continue to cross paths. So thank you, Donnie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And I'm sorry we couldn't talk more, but we'll
Oh, no,
definitely put more information about this documentary because it's powerful for many reasons. I mentioned Black Wall Street earlier. There's some footage in there.
mm,
But definitely, I hope that people watch this and they're inspired by your work because it's inspiring.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Go out and live in full color.
Yes, you too. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening or watching Destinations with Doni. Show your support by rating this episode on your podcast platform, wherever you listen to your podcast. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe to get notifications of new episodes because you don't want to ever miss out on any of this cross-cultural goodness.